What if the deadliest dictator in human history was just a few brushstrokes away from living a quiet, harmless life as a landscape painter? History often turns on the smallest of hinges. In the early 20th century, a young, intensely passionate boy wandered the majestic streets of Vienna, carrying nothing but a portfolio of watercolor paintings and an unshakable belief in his own artistic genius. He did not dream of world domination, nor did he fantasize about armies marching across Europe. His ambitions were entirely confined to the borders of a canvas. Yet, the rejection of these simple artistic dreams would ultimately set the stage for a cataclysm that would devour millions of lives, forever altering the course of the modern world.
The year was 1907. 18-year-old Adolf arrived in the imperial capital of Vienna, a dazzling metropolis teeming with culture, music, and art. To a provincial boy, Vienna was the ultimate promised land. He had convinced himself that his destiny was to become a great classical artist, a master architect, or perhaps both. Armed with his modest portfolio of sketches, mostly architectural renderings and rigid landscapes, he prepared to take the entrance exam for the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts. He possessed an unwavering, almost arrogant confidence in his abilities, completely unaware that the academic elites of the city would soon pass a judgment that would shatter his fragile ego and change him forever.
The examination process at the Academy of Fine Arts was rigorous. Out of 113 candidates, only 28 were admitted. Adolf was not among them. The official verdict was brief and devastating. Test drawing unsatisfactory. The professors noted that his work showed an absolute lack of appreciation for the human form. His figures were lifeless, stiff, and completely devoid of emotion or dynamic movement. They suggested his talents leaned more toward architecture, but without a formal high school diploma, the School of Architecture was completely closed to him. The young man was stunned. For the first time in his life, his grandiose vision of himself collided violently with the harsh, undeniable reality of his own mediocrity.
A year later, in 1908, he returned to the Academy, desperate for a second chance. This time, the rejection was even more humiliating. His work was deemed so inadequate that he was not even allowed to sit for the formal exam. The door to his artistic future was permanently slammed shut. This moment of absolute failure proved to be a psychological breaking point. Instead of introspecting or practicing to improve his craft, his mind immediately sought scapegoats. The refusal of the Academy was not seen as a reflection of his own lack of skill, but rather as a deliberate, malicious conspiracy by a society that failed to recognize his unparalleled, misunderstood genius.
With his inheritance depleted and his dreams reduced to ash, he rapidly descended into the brutal, unforgiving underbelly of Vienna. The boy who had once roamed the city, admiring its grand operas and monumental palaces, was now entirely destitute. He spent his nights shivering in crowded homeless shelters and squalid flophouses, sleeping on hard wooden benches alongside the city's forgotten outcasts. Hunger became his constant companion. The stark contrast between his deeply ingrained sense of superiority and his wretched, impoverished reality created a psychological pressure cooker. He felt utterly betrayed by the world. It was in these dark, damp shelters that the seeds of his venomous worldview began to take root and flourish. To survive, he resorted to copying images from popular postcards, painting small, uninspired watercolors of famous Viennese landmarks, and hawking them to tourists and frame dealers in taverns. He was a starving artist in the most literal sense, existing on the absolute margins of society. Every day was an exercise in humiliation. He watched wealthy bourgeois citizens stroll past him in their fine winter coats, completely oblivious to his suffering. This daily indignity festered inside him. His failure to become a recognized artist was rationalized as a profound injustice. He began to believe that the system was inherently corrupt, controlled by unseen forces that deliberately kept true visionaries like himself crushed in the gutter. Vienna, at the time, was a melting pot of nationalities, deeply fractured by toxic political movements, virulent nationalism, and rampant anti-Semitism.
The failed artist became a voracious reader of extremist pamphlets and right-wing newspapers. Lacking formal education, he absorbed these radical ideologies like a sponge, desperately searching for a grand theory to explain his personal failures. He found it by internalizing the darkest prejudices of his era. He began to project his immense self-loathing and resentment onto marginalized groups, constructing a twisted, paranoid worldview. The canvas he now sought to paint upon was no longer made of cloth. It was a dark, ideological tapestry, woven entirely out of hatred, blame, and a desperate need for revenge.
When the First World War erupted in 1914, it was an absolute salvation for the lost soul. The outbreak of global conflict rescued him from obscurity and the meaningless void of his civilian life. He enthusiastically enlisted in the Bavarian army. For the very first time, he belonged to something greater than himself. The strict discipline, the camaraderie of the trenches, and the shared purpose of warfare gave him the structure and validation he had craved since his rejection from the Art Academy. He was a brave, if overly zealous, soldier, earning medals for his service. War became his new art form, an arena where destruction and violence were not just normalized, but celebrated as heroic virtues. But his newfound military universe collapsed in the autumn of 1918. Following the horrific British mustard gas attack, he was temporarily blinded and sent to a military hospital in Pasewalk. It was there, lying completely helpless in the dark, that he heard the devastating news. Germany had surrendered. The Empire had fallen. To him, this was an unimaginable catastrophe, a profound betrayal that shattered his psyche. In his temporary blindness, he claimed to experience a profound, almost mystical hallucination. He became convinced that he was divinely chosen, not to paint landscapes, but to resurrect a fallen nation. The bitter artist died on that hospital bed, and a fanatical political monster was completely born in his place.
Returning to a broken, politically unstable Munich, he finally found his true medium. It was not watercolor, but human emotion. Assigned to infiltrate radical political groups, he soon discovered an extraordinary, terrifying talent for public speaking. In the crowded, smoke-filled beer halls of Bavaria, he captivated disillusioned veterans and desperate citizens. He channeled his own profound bitterness into soaring, hysterical oratory. He intuitively understood the raw anger of the crowds because it mirrored his own deep-seated resentments. He painted vivid, horrifying pictures of national betrayal, offering simple, violent solutions to incredibly complex problems. The crowds were absolutely mesmerized. The failed painter had transformed into a master manipulator of mass psychology.
Following a disastrous, premature attempt to seize power in a coup known as the Beer Hall Putsch, he was arrested and sentenced to prison. But rather than ending his political career, his time behind bars provided him with a quiet sanctuary to consolidate his toxic philosophy. Pacing the floor of his comfortable cell, he dictated his rambling, hateful manifesto, Mein Kampf. Within those pages, he laid out a chilling blueprint for the future. He meticulously detailed his absolute hatred for democracy, his fanatical theories of racial purity, and his unquenchable desire for global conquest. The book was a window into a deeply damaged mind, a terrifying outline of the atrocities that were waiting to be unleashed upon the world. By the early 1930s, the economic devastation of the Great Depression provided the perfect storm for his meteoric rise. Millions of unemployed, desperate Germans flocked to his extreme ideology. He utilized brilliant, terrifyingly effective propaganda to present himself as the sole savior of the nation. The man who had once been ignored by the wealthy elite of Vienna was now worshipped as a demigod by millions. He orchestrated massive, theatrical rallies that appealed directly to human emotion rather than reason, turning politics into a sinister, hypnotic art form. With every speech, he drew the masses deeper into his dark, uncompromising vision, relentlessly tearing down the fragile democratic institutions of the Weimar Republic.
Upon being appointed chancellor in 1933, he systematically and ruthlessly dismantled every single opposition force. In a matter of months, the failed artist became the absolute dictator of a totalitarian state. His personal grievances were now the official laws of the land. The meticulous attention to detail he once desperately tried to apply to his architectural sketches was now redirected toward constructing a massive, terrifying military-industrial complex. He transformed a struggling nation into a highly disciplined, heavily armed war machine, utterly, entirely obedient to his will. The world watched in paralyzed apprehension as he boldly defied international treaties, aggressively expanding his borders and relentlessly preparing his nation for a conflict of unprecedented scale.
The ensuing global conflict became his grotesque masterpiece. World War II unleashed horrors that defied human comprehension. Cities across Europe were completely pulverized into dust and rubble beneath the relentless bombings of his air force. Millions of innocent men, women, and children were systematically targeted, rounded up, and brutally murdered in an industrialized genocide of unimaginable cruelty. The artist who had once wept over a rejected portfolio of watercolors now enthusiastically orchestrated the slaughter of entire populations without a single shred of empathy or remorse. He had finally reshaped the entire world, not with the delicate, beautiful strokes of a paintbrush, but with the brutal, unforgiving machinery of war, fire, and absolute annihilation.
In the spring of 1945, the apocalyptic empire he had built finally collapsed in on itself. Hiding deep underground, in a gloomy, reinforced concrete bunker beneath the smoldering, shattered ruins of Berlin, the dictator faced his absolute end. The 1,000-year Reich he promised had lasted barely a decade, leaving behind a continent drenched in blood and sorrow. Taking his own life, he left a legacy of unparalleled infamy and destruction. One cannot help but look back at the young, naive boy standing outside the Academy in Vienna, holding his modest sketches. If only the Academy had seen a spark of promise. If only he had simply been allowed to paint. The world would have been spared.